Dr. Benjamin Torres had been conducting xenobiological research in remote stations for 12 years, which meant he was exceptionally good at two things: analyzing non-terrestrial life forms and getting himself into situations that required creative problem-solving. The current situation, being completely, hopelessly lost in a floating city that appeared to be designed by architects who thought physics was more of a suggestion than a law, definitely qualified for the second category. Axion Prime was beautiful in ways that made Earth's greatest cities look like rough drafts. Crystal spires rose thousands of feet, connected by bridges that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The streets themselves were suspended between structures, held aloft by technology that the Thessian Empire considered so basic they didn't bother explaining it to visiting humans. And apparently, these streets reconfigured themselves based on some algorithm involving traffic flow, time of day, and possibly the alignment of local celestial bodies. Because Ben was absolutely certain this intersection hadn't looked like this 15 minutes ago. His datapad showed his location as a blue dot in a sea of unhelpfully labeled districts. The delegation rendezvous point was a different blue dot approximately 2 miles away, through what appeared to be several dozen reconfiguring street segments, and possibly a pocket dimension. Ambassador Chen was going to kill him, or at least subject him to the kind of disappointed lecture that made actual death seem preferable. "I just wanted to photograph the bioluminescent architecture," Ben muttered to himself, checking his translator for the 17th time. The device had been working perfectly, until he'd leaned too far over a decorative water feature to get a better angle on some fascinating crystalline growth patterns, and dropped it directly into what turned out to be a fountain with active currents. He'd fished it out quickly, but the damage was done. Now it kept cutting in and out, rendering Thessian into standard English with all the reliability of a coin flip. A Thessian couple passed him, their crystalline skin refracting the ambient light into rainbow patterns. They were tall, like all their species, easily 7 feet, with the gracefully pointed ears that could rotate independently to track sound sources. Their skin showed colors that Ben's struggling translator suggested indicated polite curiosity mixed with mild concern about the lost alien. "Excuse me," Ben tried in his limited Thessian, which mostly consisted of pleasantries he'd memorized from the delegation briefing materials. "I am looking for the diplomatic quarter." The couple exchanged glances, their skin colors shifting through patterns that Ben couldn't interpret. The woman spoke in flowing Thessian that his translator rendered as, "You walk, untranslatable, until reaching the crystal. Error. Then ascend through. Connection lost." "Thank you," Ben said, because at least he knew how to say that. The couple nodded politely and continued on their way, leaving Ben exactly as lost as before but now with unhelpful partial directions. He checked his datapad again. The delegation was definitely going to leave without him if he didn't figure this out soon. Ambassador Chen had been very clear about the importance of maintaining schedules during these first contact protocols. "We're representing all of humanity," she'd said during their pre-mission briefing. "Every action reflects on our entire species. Please try not to embarrass us by getting lost in their capital city within the first 6 hours." Ben sighed and made his way to what appeared to be a small park area suspended between two massive structures. Crystal trees, or what looked like trees but were probably something far more complex, provided shade that somehow existed despite the light sources being diffuse and omnidirectional. A bench that appeared to have grown from the ground, rather than being placed there, offered respite for his aching feet. He sat, pulling out his toolkit to attempt another repair on the translator. 12 years of fieldwork had taught him basic electronics maintenance, though Thessian technology was significantly more advanced than human equipment. Still, water damage was water damage regardless of which planet's engineers had designed the circuits. While carefully opening the translator's casing, Ben noticed a small figure near a fountain about 30 feet away. A Thessian child, considerably smaller than the adults he'd encountered, standing alone and clutching something to her chest. Even without a working translator, Ben recognized the body language of a distressed kid, the kind of posture that said she was trying very hard not to cry but wasn't succeeding. Ben glanced around, looking for parents or guardians. The park area was relatively empty, just a few Thessians moving through without paying attention to the child. Her skin was showing colors that cycled rapidly through shades Ben's broken translator couldn't identify, but which screamed emotional distress in any language. His xenobiological training included extensive work with different species, including their young. Universal rule: a distressed child needed help regardless of whether they were human, Thessian, or silicon-based life forms from Tau Ceti. Ben carefully set down his translator repair tools and approached the child slowly, keeping his movements deliberately unthreatening. "Hey there," he said softly, aware she probably couldn't understand him but hoping tone would carry meaning. "Are you okay?" The child looked up, her large eyes, more prominent than adult Thessians, giving her face an almost haunting quality, fixed on him. Her skin flashed through colors that suggested fear mixing with something that might have been curiosity. She took a small step backward, clutching whatever she held even tighter. Ben stopped his approach, crouching down to make himself less imposing. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm Ben. I'm lost too, actually, which might make me the least threatening person you could run into." He offered what he hoped was a reassuring smile. The child tilted her head, her ears rotating slightly to focus on his voice. She said something in Thessian, her voice carrying those same harmonics that adult Thessians had, but at a higher pitch, that was somehow both alien and achingly familiar to anyone who'd ever heard a scared kid. Ben wished desperately for his translator to work. Instead, he tried communication through action. He pointed to himself. "Ben," then gestured to her with a questioning expression. She hesitated, her skin shifting through several colors before settling on something that might have indicated cautious willingness to engage. "Lyria," she said softly, the name coming through clearly despite the linguistic differences. "Lyria. That's a beautiful name." Ben smiled again, then noticed she was looking at what she held, a small mechanical construct that appeared to be some kind of toy. It looked like a bird, or what Thessians might consider a bird, with delicate metallic wings and a body that suggested it should be capable of flight. Currently it hung limp in her hands, obviously not functioning. "Is your toy broken?" Ben asked, pointing to the construct. Lyria's skin flashed through colors that definitely indicated sadness. She nodded, holding the toy out slightly as if offering it for inspection. Ben carefully extended his hand, moving slowly. "May I look at it? I fix things sometimes. Not always successfully, but sometimes." Lyria studied him for a long moment, her ears tilting forward in what Ben hoped was consideration rather than preparation to run. Finally, she took a small step forward and placed the toy in his hands with the careful trust of a child who'd been taught to be cautious, but desperately wanted help. The construct was lightweight, clearly designed for a child's play, but the engineering was sophisticated even by Thessian standards. Ben turned it over carefully, examining the joints and energy nodes. His xenobiology background included enough mechanical systems knowledge from maintaining field equipment that he could usually puzzle out basic machinery regardless of its origin. "Let's see what we have here," he murmured, more for his own benefit than for communication. "Energy source looks intact. Wing mechanisms are undamaged. Ah, there's the problem." A small coupling that connected the central power node to the flight systems had come loose, probably from rough play or an unfortunate drop. Ben pulled a micro tool from his belt, one of the universal implements that every field researcher carried, and carefully manipulated the coupling back into its proper position. The toy required delicate handling. Whatever materials the Thessians used were strong but precisely calibrated, and human fingers were definitely not designed for their fine mechanics. After 3 minutes of careful adjustment, during which Lyria watched with intense focus, Ben felt the coupling click into place. The toy immediately came to life, its wings beginning to flutter with soft whirring sounds. It lifted from his hands, hovering in the air between him and Lyria, and emitted a series of musical chirps that suggested it was programmed to be interactive. Lyria's entire demeanor transformed. Her skin shifted to brilliant golds and blues that even Ben's limited cultural knowledge recognized as joy. She laughed, a sound that was surprisingly similar to human child laughter despite the harmonic qualities, and reached for the toy, which bobbed around her head in what appeared to be programmed playful behavior. "There you go," Ben said, feeling the kind of satisfaction that came from solving a problem, even a small one. "All fixed." Lyria clutched the now functioning toy, her skin continuing to show those happy colors. She looked at Ben with an expression that transcended species, pure gratitude mixed with the kind of assessment children made when deciding if an adult was trustworthy. Whatever calculation she made happened quickly, because her wariness evaporated entirely. She started speaking rapidly in Thessian, her words tumbling over each other with the enthusiasm of a child who'd found someone willing to listen. Ben caught maybe one word in 10, his broken translator offering fragments. "Scared. Lost. But now, thank you, Mother will." "Slow down, Lyria. My translator is broken, and I'm not understanding most of what you're saying." Ben gestured to the malfunctioning device on his belt. "I'm really glad your toy is fixed, though." Lyria seemed to process that he couldn't understand her. She paused, then made a decision with the kind of absolute certainty that children sometimes achieved. She reached out and grabbed Ben's hand with surprising determination for such a small being, her crystalline skin cool against his palm but not uncomfortable. "I'm taking you to my mother, human," she announced clearly, the sentence simple enough that even Ben's failing translator managed to render it properly. Ben blinked. "Oh, well, that's very kind, but I don't want to impose. I'm sure your mother is busy, and I really need to find my way back to the diplomatic quarter before my delegation leaves without me." But Lyria was already pulling him along with the single-minded purpose that children employed when they'd made up their minds. Her skin had shifted to confident oranges and determined purples, colors that suggested she would not be dissuaded. Ben allowed himself to be led, figuring that following the child was at least better than continuing to wander lost. At minimum, Lyria's mother would probably know how to help him get back to the diplomatic quarter. At worst, he'd meet a mildly annoyed Thessian parent who would wonder why a strange human was holding her daughter's hand. It didn't occur to him, until they'd walked 3 blocks, that every Thessian they passed was stopping to stare with expressions that went beyond simple curiosity into something that looked like shock. The residential district Lyria led him through was beautiful in ways that made Ben wish his datapad hadn't died along with his translator's battery backup. The architecture here seemed even more organic than the commercial areas, buildings that looked like they'd been grown rather than constructed, with balconies that defied gravity and gardens that existed in vertical orientations that hurt his earth-trained spatial reasoning. But he was increasingly aware that their passage was causing reactions that went beyond ordinary interest in an alien visitor. Thessians stopped mid-conversation to stare. Some approached as if to speak, then hesitated when they saw Lyria's determined posture and the way she gripped Ben's hand. Their skin colors shifted through patterns that Ben's malfunctioning translator caught fragments of. "Shock, is that? Error. The princess. Connection lost. Holding a human." "Princess?" That word came through clearly enough to make Ben's steps falter. "Lyria, wait, did I hear that right? Did someone just say?" But Lyria just looked up at him with a smile that suggested she found his confusion amusing, her skin showing colors that might have been gentle patience with slow adults. She tugged his hand again, clearly not interested in stopping for explanations. They rounded a corner, and Ben's concerns about misunderstanding intensified dramatically. The street opened into a massive plaza, and directly ahead, impossible to miss and definitely not the home of just some ordinary family, stood the Imperial Palace. Ben had seen it in the delegation briefings. Ambassador Chen had shown them extensive holoprojections during mission prep, explaining that the palace was the seat of power for the entire Thessian Empire, home to the Empress and her immediate family, and absolutely not a place where delegation members should wander without explicit invitation and 17 layers of diplomatic protocol. Lyria, stop, please stop. Ben tried to halt, but the child's grip was surprisingly strong for her size. I can't just walk into the Imperial Palace. There are rules, there's protocol. There's the very real possibility that I'll cause an interstellar incident that ends with Ambassador Chen having me shipped back to Earth in a box labeled diplomatic failure. Lyria looked up at him with an expression that suggested she didn't understand what he was worried about. Her skin showed colors that his translator managed to render as happy confidence, and something that might have been silly human. Everything will be fine. They approached the main gates, and Ben's internal alarm systems went from concern to actively panicking. The gates were massive, seeming to be carved from single pieces of crystal that rose 50 feet high, with energy barriers shimmering across their surfaces in patterns that were definitely not decorative. Elite guards in ceremonial armor that looked like it had been grown rather than forged stood at attention, their skin showing colors that Ben's translator struggled with but which definitely included shocked recognition. And this was not covered in our duty briefing. The guards didn't stop Lyria. That was the part that made Ben certain he'd somehow ended up in a situation that was going to define the rest of his career, and not in a good way. Elite Imperial guards saw a small child leading a human toward the palace, and instead of challenging them, they immediately began speaking urgently into communication devices, while their skin flashed through colors that suggested they were calling for backup, possibly alerting superiors, and definitely wondering how this situation had occurred on their watch. Princess Lyria, one guard said in Thessian that Ben's translator actually managed to render clearly, probably because the guard was speaking with careful formality. The Empress was not informed you had left the secured areas, and you have brought a human. Lyria responded with something rapid that Ben's translator gave up on completely, but whatever she said made the guard's skin colors shift to even more alarmed shades. They didn't stop her, though. They stepped aside, allowing her to pull Ben through gates that he absolutely should not be passing through. The gardens beyond the gates were impossible. That was the only word Ben's scientific mind could supply. Water flowed upward in fountains that existed in multiple gravity states simultaneously. Plants grew in colors that Earth's evolutionary history had never bothered producing. Pathways wound through spaces that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 3, and the air itself felt different, charged with something that might have been technology, or might have been art, or might have been both. Lyria, please, Ben tried again, his voice taking on the desperate quality of someone watching a situation spiral out of control. I really think we should stop and talk about this. I don't know who you are. Okay, I'm starting to get some ideas about who you are, but I'm definitely not someone who should be here. I'm just a xenobiologist who's really good at getting lost. This morning, my biggest concern was not embarrassing my species during trade negotiations. Now, I'm apparently walking uninvited into the home of the most powerful person in your empire, while holding the hand of someone who might be royalty. Lyria stopped and looked up at him, her ears tilting forward in focused attention. She spoke slowly, clearly in Thessian that even his broken translator managed. You fixed my toy. You weren't scared of me like the others. Mother will want to meet you. The others? Ben asked, but Lyria was already moving again, pulling him toward the palace proper. They climbed steps that seemed to be carved from solid light, through doorways that recognized Lyria and opened automatically, along corridors where more guards and what appeared to be court officials stopped mid-task to stare with expressions that ranged from shocked to horrified to simply baffled. Several started to approach, possibly to intervene, but something about Lyria's determined posture or the way her skin showed absolute confidence made them hesitate. Ben heard fragments of conversations as they passed, his translator offering incomplete but deeply concerning snippets. Hasn't trusted anyone since. Error. 6 months after the attempt. Connection lost. Bringing a human to the Empress. Untranslatable, unprecedented. The corridors grew progressively more elaborate, art and architecture combining in ways that suggested they'd moved from merely palace into actual throne room territory. Ben's heart was racing now, his xenobiologist training warring with his human survival instincts. Part of him was fascinated by the cultural implications of what was happening. The rest of him was certain he was about to create the kind of diplomatic incident that would be studied in first contact classes for generations. They entered a final corridor, this one lined with guards whose armor was even more elaborate than the gate's sentries, their skin showing colors that Ben's translator rendered as highest military authority, and really wishing they'd gotten a different duty assignment today. At the end of the corridor, massive doors stood open, revealing a chamber beyond that made everything they'd passed through look modest by comparison. "Lyria," Ben said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think we should really reconsider." But they'd already crossed the threshold into the throne room, and Ben's words died in his throat as he took in the sheer, impossible scale of the space. The throne room of the Thessian Empire looked like someone had taken a cathedral, a museum, and a physics experiment, and combined them into something that existed partially outside normal space. The ceiling soared upward into shadows that might have been architectural, or might have been something else entirely. Crystal pillars rose at intervals that suggested both structural support and artistic expression, each one showing flowing patterns that might have been decorative, or might have been some kind of information display Ben couldn't interpret. And at the far end of the chamber, on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal that contained entire galaxies within its depths, sat the Empress of the Thessian Empire. She was taller than any Thessian Ben had encountered, her bearing radiating authority in ways that made his primate hindbrain want to drop to the ground and submit to the obviously superior being. Her crystalline skin showed patterns that shifted through every color simultaneously, creating a display that Ben's overwhelmed translator identified as Supreme Royal Designation, highest possible rank. Her ears were adorned with jewelry that appeared to be actual compressed starlight, and her robes, if they could be called robes, seemed to be woven from light itself. Court officials and advisors stood in precise formation around the throne room, their skin colors carefully neutral in the way that suggested they were all trying very hard not to react to whatever was happening. More guards lined the walls, their attention locked on the small princess who just entered holding a human's hand. The Empress saw them. Her eyes, larger than human eyes, more prominent, and currently showing an expression that transcended species barriers, fixed on Lyria and the strange alien her daughter had brought home. The entire throne room held its breath. Lyria released Ben's hand and ran toward her. The Empress's gaze never left Ben. When she finally spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made his malfunctioning translator vibrate with the effort of rendering it into standard English. But the words came through with crystal clarity. "Lyria, you have brought a human into the throne room." It wasn't quite a question, more an observation that suggested the Empress was processing information that challenged her entire framework of expectation. Lyria nodded enthusiastically, her skin showing colors that definitely meant pleased with myself. She continued speaking, gesturing to Ben and to her now functional toy, clearly explaining the entire encounter from her perspective. Ben stood frozen in the center of the throne room, acutely aware that dozens of eyes were on him, that half the guards present probably had weapons trained on him despite their formal postures, and that he had approximately zero idea what protocol required in this situation. Bo, kneel. Run very fast in the opposite direction. The Empress's attention shifted fully to him, and Ben felt the weight of that assessment like a physical force. She was evaluating him with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she could read his entire psychological profile through observation alone. When she spoke again, it was in perfect standard English, the accent suggesting extensive study and possibly direct neural language integration. Dr. Benjamin Torres of the Terran delegation. My daughter, who has barely spoken to anyone outside immediate family since an assassination attempt 6 months ago, who has been terrified of strangers regardless of species, who screams when unfamiliar people approach her, has brought you into my home by her own choice. The assassination attempt. That explained the fragments Ben had overheard, the way guards had reacted, the significance that everyone seemed to attach to Lyria choosing to trust him. Your Majesty, Ben managed, his voice somehow staying level despite his internal panic. I apologize for the intrusion. I was lost in the city and I encountered Lyria in distress. Her toy was broken and I fixed it. She insisted on bringing me here, and I followed because she seemed determined, and I thought perhaps her mother, you, could help me find my way back to the diplomatic quarter. I had no idea she was princess, or that this was inappropriate, or that I was about to create what is probably a significant diplomatic incident. Honesty seemed like the best policy when you'd accidentally walked into an imperial throne room, holding the hand of traumatized royalty. The Empress studied him for a long moment. Her skin shifted through patterns that Ben couldn't interpret, but which seemed to indicate she was processing information, recalculating assessments, and possibly determining whether to have him quietly escorted out or loudly thrown out. You helped my daughter without knowing her identity, the Empress finally said. You expected no reward, no recognition, no political advantage. You simply saw a child in distress and offered assistance. Yes, Your Majesty. She was upset, and I'm a xenobiologist. Working with different species, including their young, is part of my training. Helping a distressed child seemed like the obvious thing to do regardless of species or circumstances. The Empress stood, and the entire court shifted in response, their collective posture adjusting to mirror her movement. She descended from her throne with measured grace, each step deliberate, and crossed the throne room floor toward where Ben stood trying very hard not to shake visibly. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns in her crystalline skin, the way light refracted through her form in ways that suggested her biology operated on principles human science was only beginning to understand. Dr. Torres, she said quietly, though her voice still carried throughout the chamber, you have done something that dozens of carefully selected companions, therapists, and trusted guards could not accomplish in 6 months. You have earned my daughter's instinctive trust. In Theshan culture, a child's immediate trust is considered sacred, a judgment made without the corruption of political calculation or social expectation. She glanced at Lyria, who had remained close by and was watching the interaction between Ben and her mother with obvious interest. My daughter has claimed you in her way as someone worthy of her regard. This creates complications. Behind the Empress, court officials were exchanging urgent whispered conversations, their skin colors flashing through patterns that suggested they were having about 17 different political crises simultaneously. The Empress raised one hand, a simple gesture that commanded absolute silence, and addressed Ben directly with words that he instinctively knew were going to reshape his immediate future in ways he couldn't begin to predict. Welcome to the Imperial Court, Dr. Benjamin Torres. You have approximately 4 hours before news of this spreads throughout the sector, before every government receives reports that the Empress's daughter has chosen a human as a trusted companion, before political factions on a dozen worlds begin calculating how to exploit this unprecedented situation. She paused, her skin shifting to colors that might have been grim amusement. We should discuss how to manage what you have accidentally initiated, and perhaps someone should inform your ambassador Chen that you won't be returning to the delegation rendezvous on schedule. Ben opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, because honestly, what could he possibly say to that? He'd woken up this morning thinking his biggest challenge would be not embarrassing Earth during diplomatic ceremonies. Now he was standing in an imperial throne room, being welcomed to court by an empress, while a small alien princess beamed at him with the kind of trust that apparently had serious political implications. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard his mother's voice from childhood. "Benjamin, your need to help every stray you find is going to get you into trouble someday." But apparently, someday had arrived with a vengeance, and trouble involved empresses, assassination attempts, traumatized royalty, and political complications that would probably be studied by diplomatic scholars for decades. "I think," Ben said carefully, "that Ambassador Chen is going to kill me." The Empress's skin shifted to colors that Ben's translator identified as genuine amusement. "Unlikely, though she may wish to. Come, Dr. Tors. We have much to discuss, and my daughter appears to have decided you are staying for dinner." Lyria grabbed Ben's hand again, her skin showing happy golds that suggested she was very pleased with how her day had turned out. Ben allowed himself to be led deeper into the palace, following an empress and her daughter, while his scientific mind cataloged this as definitely the most significant fieldwork of his career, and his survival instincts screamed that he had just become a central piece in political games he didn't begin to understand. Just another day in xenobiological research, apparently. The private chamber the Empress led them to was considerably less intimidating than the throne room, though less intimidating was relative when you were still in a palace with an absolute monarch. The space was designed with what Ben assumed was Thessian domestic sensibility, furniture arranged for comfortable conversation rather than formal ceremony, walls showing subtle color shifts that his translator suggested indicated private family spaces, and actual windows that looked out over the floating city with views that made Ben's altitude-adapted hindbrain very nervous. Lyria had settled onto a cushioned seat designed for her smaller size, her toy bird hovering nearby and emitting occasional musical chirps. She seemed completely at ease, which Ben supposed made sense since this was her home. He, on the other hand, was trying very hard not to look like someone who expected guards to burst in at any moment with "Actually, we've reconsidered letting the random human stay" orders. The Empress had dismissed most of her attendants, leaving only 2 guards stationed outside the chamber and 1 advisor, an older Thessian whose skin bore patterns suggesting high rank and long service. The advisor's expression, to the extent Ben could read Thessian expressions, suggested she was experiencing several forms of stress simultaneously. "Dr. Tors," the Empress began, settling into a seat with the kind of grace that suggested she'd spent a lifetime perfecting formal posture. "Before we discuss the political implications of your presence here, I need to understand exactly what transpired between you and my daughter. Please be thorough. Details that seem insignificant to you may carry weight in Thessian cultural context." Ben recounted the entire encounter, getting lost, finding Lyria distressed by the fountain, the broken toy, his repair work, her sudden determination to bring him to meet her mother. He tried to be as precise as possible, aware that he was essentially giving a scientific field report to someone who could probably end his diplomatic career with a single word. Throughout his explanation, the Empress listened with focused intensity, her skin shifting through subtle color changes that Ben couldn't interpret. Lyria occasionally interjected with her own commentary in rapid Thessian that Ben's translator struggled with, and the Empress would nod or ask gentle clarifying questions. When he finished, Silence filled the chamber for a long moment. The Empress exchanged glances with her advisor, their skin colors communicating in ways that transcended verbal language. "Advisor Kelly's," the Empress said, switching to Theshan that Ben's translator rendered with unusual clarity. "Your assessment of the cultural implications." Kelly's skin showed colors that Ben's device identified as concerned deliberation mixed with acknowledgement of unprecedented circumstances. "Your Majesty, in 30 years serving the court, I have never seen Princess Lyria respond to a stranger with this level of immediate trust. Not since the attack has she willingly engaged with anyone outside the innermost circle of vetted family and guards." The Empress nodded slowly, her gaze returning to Ben. "6 months ago, there was an assassination attempt during a public ceremony. Lyria was with me when it occurred. She wasn't physically harmed, but the psychological impact was severe. Since then, she has exhibited what your human psychology would classify as acute stress responses: fear of strangers, refusal to engage with new people, nightmares, the constellation of symptoms your species recognizes in traumatized children." Ben felt his chest tighten. He'd worked with traumatized juvenile subjects in his xenobiology research, young beings of various species who'd experienced violence or loss. The patterns were often similar across vastly different biologies. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. That must have been terrifying for both of you." "We have tried everything," the Empress continued, and for the first time Ben heard something in her voice that wasn't absolute authority. It was exhaustion tinged with parental desperation. "Theshan therapeutic approaches, consultations with species known for psychological expertise, carefully introduced companions selected for their gentle natures. Nothing worked. Lyria would either refuse to engage entirely or exhibit such distress that we had to stop the attempts." "And then," Kelly's added, her skin showing colors that suggested she still didn't quite believe what had happened, "she brings home a human, a species she's had minimal exposure to, with complete trust and obvious joy. This is unprecedented." The Empress stood, moving to the window, her posture showing less of the absolute monarch and more of the concerned parent. "Dr. Tors, you need to understand what Lyria's choice means in our culture. When a Theshan child, particularly one from a royal bloodline, demonstrates immediate instinctive trust towards someone, it is considered a sacred judgment. We believe that children perceive authenticity that adults miss, that they read intentions unclouded by political calculation." "Your daughter trusts easily then?" Ben asked, trying to understand the framework. "The opposite." The Empress turned back to face him. "Royal children are trained from early age to be cautious, to evaluate intentions, to recognize potential threats. This training is necessary because they are targets from birth. Lyria's trust of you is not naivety. It's an assessment made by someone who has learned to be suspicious of everyone, finding you somehow worthy of exception." Ben processed that, his scientist mind working through the implications. "So when she chose to bring me here, she was making a declaration that you passed evaluations she applies to everyone she encounters. Evaluations that, since the attack, no stranger has passed." The Empress's skin shifted through contemplative colors, and she made this declaration publicly, leading you through the city, through the palace, into the throne room in front of the entire court. "That has political weight, Dr. Tors, whether you intended it or not." Kelly stepped forward, her posture suggesting she was about to deliver unwelcome information. "Word is already spreading, Your Majesty. Multiple factions are requesting audiences. The Trade Minister wants to discuss how this affects the human diplomatic mission. The Defense Council is concerned about security implications. And I've received 3 separate inquiries from noble houses, asking whether this represents a shift in succession considerations." "Of course they are." The Empress's tone carried the weariness of someone who'd spent too long navigating political minefields. "A human gains the princess's trust, which by extension suggests imperial approval. which various factions will interpret as everything from trade opportunity to military alliance to succession politics. Ben felt his anxiety ratcheting upward. Your Majesty, I don't want to cause political problems. I can return to my delegation, stay away from the palace, make it clear that I have no special status or... That option expired the moment Lyria led you through the throne room, the Empress interrupted, not unkindly. The court has seen, the guards have reported. Within hours, news will reach every major government in the sector. You cannot unring this bell, Dr. Tors. She moved back to her seat, her posture shifting into something that Ben recognized as command mode. The Empress making decisions rather than the mother expressing concern. Here are the realities we must navigate. First, Lyria has claimed you as trusted companion. Rejecting that claim publicly would devastate her psychologically and politically, signal that the imperial family disregards sacred cultural traditions regarding children's judgment. Second, Kelly's continued, clearly working in practice tandem with the Empress, multiple factions will attempt to exploit your presence for their own political advantage. Some will offer you benefits to influence the princess, and by extension, imperial policy. Others will see you as a threat and work to undermine or eliminate that perceived influence. Third, the Empress said, her skin showing colors that suggested grim calculation, there are still those who orchestrated the assassination attempt 6 months ago. We never identified all the conspirators. If they perceive you as having genuine access to the imperial family, you become a target either for exploitation or elimination. Ben's mouth had gone dry. So by helping a lost child, I've accidentally made myself a piece in political games that might get me killed. Welcome to imperial politics, the Empress said with what might have been dark humor. Though to be fair, you're also in the unique position of having earned something that hasn't existed since the attempt, my daughter's genuine trust and happiness. That has value that transcends political calculation. Lyria, who had been quietly playing with her toy during the adult conversation, chose that moment to speak up. She said something in Thescian while looking directly at her mother, her skin showing colors that even Ben could recognize as determined insistence. The Empress's expression softened. Lyria wants to know if you're staying for dinner, and if you'll show her more about human toys, and if you can visit again tomorrow. Ben looked at the small princess, her large eyes fixed on him with trust that he absolutely didn't deserve but couldn't bear to betray, and felt his resistance to this insane situation crumbling. I would be honored to stay for dinner, Lyria, and yes, I can visit tomorrow if your mother allows it. Lyria's skin flashed to brilliant golds and blues, joy colors Ben was learning to recognize. She launched into excited chatter, and the Empress actually smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her from absolute monarch to mother pleased to see her child happy. That's settled then, the Empress said. Dr. Tors, here is what I propose. You will accept the role of cultural liaison and special companion to the princess. This gives you formal position in the court, which provides protection and status that will discourage casual attempts to exploit or harm you. It also legitimizes your presence in ways that satisfy the political factions, who are currently scrambling to understand what this means. But I'm a xenobiologist, not a diplomat. I have no training in court politics or... You have something more valuable than training, Kelly's interjected. You have my daughter's trust, earned through genuine kindness rather than political maneuvering. That is something no courtier can fake, and no diplomat can negotiate. The Empress stood, clearly considering the matter decided. Advisor Kelly's will coordinate with your Ambassador Chen regarding the formal details. You'll be assigned quarters in the palace, provided with appropriate attire and cultural education, and given security sufficient to discourage the more obvious threats. In exchange, you will spend time with Lyria, help her continue recovering from her trauma, and provide your honest perspective on matters involving human-Thescian relations. Ben processed this, his analytical mind noting that he'd just been recruited into court service through a combination of Lyria's trust, political necessity, and the fact that refusing would probably break a traumatized child's heart. And if I make mistakes, I know almost nothing about Thessian culture beyond the basic briefing materials. Then you'll learn, the Empress said simply, and you'll make mistakes which we will navigate together. I'm not asking for perfection, Dr. Torres. I'm asking for the same genuine kindness you showed a distressed child in a park. Everything else we can work with. A chime sounded, and Kelly's checked a device on her wrist. Your Majesty, Ambassador Chen is requesting urgent communication regarding one of her delegation members who failed to return to the rendezvous. I'll speak with her, the Empress said. Dr. Torres, you may want to prepare yourself. I suspect your ambassador is experiencing several forms of panic simultaneously regarding your disappearance. Ben winced. Ambassador Chen is very thorough about protocol. Then she and I will have an interesting conversation about how her xenobiologist has just become an official member of my daughter's household. The Empress's skin showed colors that might have been amusement. Kelly's, please show Dr. Torres to guest quarters and begin arranging the formal appointments. And perhaps find him something to wear to dinner that doesn't look like he's been wandering lost through the city for several hours. Ben was guided out by Kelly's, Lyria insisting on following along while chattering about dinner plans and toys and questions about Earth that Ben's translator provided in fragmentary bursts. As they walked through corridors that he was beginning to recognize were part of the private family sections of the palace, Ben reflected on how his morning had started, lost and concerned about being late to a diplomatic meeting, and where he'd ended up, inducted into imperial service, assigned as companion to traumatized royalty, and about to become a figure in political machinations he didn't begin to understand. His datapad chimed with an incoming message that had somehow found its way through the palace's communication systems. It was from Ambassador Chen, and it was exactly as panicked as he'd expected. Torres, where are you? The THESSINS. Say you're at the Imperial Palace. The Empress wants to speak with me. What did you do, Chen? Ben typed back. Long story. Short version. I helped a lost child. She turned out to be the princess, and I've apparently been recruited as cultural liaison. We'll explain more at dinner, which I'm having at the palace, with the Empress. Please don't be too angry, Ben. The response came back almost immediately. Dinner with the Empress. Torres, we need to talk. Immediately. This is either the best thing that's happened to our mission or a complete disaster, possibly both. Chen. Ben looked at Lyria, who was showing him her toy bird's various programmed behaviors with the enthusiasm of a child who'd found someone willing to engage with her interests. Looked at Kelly's, who was efficiently coordinating about 17 things simultaneously through her communication device while guiding them through the palace. Thought about the Empress, who'd gone from absolute authority to concerned mother to strategic political operator within the space of a single conversation. Definitely both, he murmured to himself. Absolutely both. The guest quarters they assigned Ben were luxurious in ways that made his researcher's apartment on Earth look like a storage closet. The space was designed with both Thessian and human-compatible furniture. Be yourself. Honest and genuine. That's apparently what got you into this situation, so consistency seems wise. Though perhaps try not to accidentally agree to anything with major political implications. I'll be monitoring communications. Good luck. And Torres, you're doing fine. Better than fine, actually. Just try not to cause any additional unprecedented situations before breakfast. Chen. Ben smiled despite his nerves. He changed into the formal attire that had somehow appeared in his quarters, clothing that seemed to be a hybrid of Thessian and human design sensibilities, comfortable but clearly marking him as someone of status within the court. When he examined himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the researcher who'd been lost in a city that morning. Kelly's returned precisely on time, her posture suggesting she'd been coordinating multiple crises simultaneously and was handling it with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Torres, you look appropriately formal. Before we proceed to dinner, I need to brief you on several matters that have developed in the past hour." Ben settled into a chair. Noting that Kelly's skin was showing colors his translator suggested indicated controlled stress, with undertones of grim satisfaction. "Good developments or concerning ones?" "Both, as seems to be the theme of today." Kelly's activated a holographic display showing what appeared to be news feeds from multiple Theshan information networks. "News of the princess's choice has spread faster than we anticipated. The major networks are covering it as the lead story. Most responses are positive. Citizens pleased to see Lyria showing trust and joy after months of concern. But there are political reactions we must navigate." The holographic feeds showed images of Ben and Lyria walking through the city, apparently captured by security surveillance, and now being broadcast across the empire. Theshan commentators spoke in rapid language that Ben's translator worked overtime to render. "Unprecedented gesture of trust. Connection unstable. Implications for human Theshan alliance. Error. Princess emerges from isolation. Translation uncertain. Questions about security protocols. The Trade Council sees your position as opportunity," Kelly's continued, switching to a different display. "They're requesting formal meetings to discuss how your influence might affect economic treaties. The defense minister wants to understand security implications of having a human with access to the imperial family." And she paused, her skin showing colors that suggested this was the concerning part. "We've detected increased activity from factions we believe were involved in the assassination attempt." Ben's stomach dropped. "They see me as a threat. Or as an opportunity. We're not certain which." Kelly's dismissed the displays. "But understand, Dr. Torres, that you now have enemies you've never met, who will view your position as either something to exploit or something to eliminate. The Empress is assigning you personal security, and I strongly advise you take their guidance seriously. I'm a xenobiologist. This morning my biggest concern was photographing interesting architecture. Now I have enemies." "Welcome to imperial politics," Kelly said with what might have been sympathy. "The positive news is that public sentiment is overwhelmingly in your favor. Citizens who have been worried about Princess Lyria's well-being are relieved to see her happy. That provides protection. Harming you would create public backlash that even our enemies would struggle to manage." A chime sounded, indicating they were expected at dinner. Ben followed Kelly's through corridors he was beginning to recognize, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He'd gone from research scientist to political figure in approximately 6 hours, all because he'd stopped to help a distressed child. The dining chamber was smaller than he'd expected, designed for family rather than formal state dinners. The Empress was already present, having changed into less formal attire though still radiating unmistakable authority. Lyria sat in a specially designed seat, her toy bird perched on a nearby stand, and her skin showing happy golds when Ben entered. "Dr. Torres, please join us." The Empress gestured to a seat that had clearly been prepared for human physiology. "This is a private family dinner, not a state function. You may relax, ask questions, and speak freely. Lyria has been very excited about showing you proper Theshan dining customs." Dinner was both fascinating and slightly overwhelming. The food was adapted for human consumption. Kelly's had apparently coordinated with the palace kitchens to ensure nothing would poison the unexpected guest, but served according to Theshan customs that involved more ceremony than Ben was used to. Lyria enthusiastically demonstrated proper utensil use, delighted when Ben attempted to mimic her techniques with varying degrees of success. The Empress proved to be an engaging conversationalist, asking Ben about his research, his work with different species, his impressions of Theshan culture. She listened with genuine interest, occasionally offering observations about Thetian biology or society that Ben filed away for later analysis. It felt less like dinner with an absolute monarch, and more like dining with a colleague who happened to rule an empire. "Lyria tells me you explained how the toy's mechanisms work," the Empress said during a lull in conversation. "She's developed an interest in engineering principles as a result. Your explanation apparently made the concepts accessible in ways her tutors haven't managed. I just described it the way I'd explain any mechanical system. Break it down to fundamental interactions, show how each component serves a function." Ben smiled at Lyria, who was demonstrating to her toy bird that she understood hovering principles by making exaggerated flying gestures. "She's clearly bright. She grasped the concepts quickly." Thetian educational methods emphasize theoretical understanding before practical application, the Empress explained. "You approached it inversely, practical demonstration leading to theoretical comprehension. It's very human, and apparently effective for Lyria's learning style." They talked through multiple courses, the conversation ranging from xenobiology to cultural differences to Lyria's interests and education. Ben found himself relaxing despite the absurdity of his situation, falling into the kind of engaged discussion he'd had countless times with research colleagues. The Empress was sharp, asking questions that demonstrated she understood both the scientific principles Ben discussed and their broader implications. Lyria eventually started showing signs of tiredness, her skin shifting to softer colors that the Empress immediately recognized. "Past someone's bedtime, I think. Lyria, Dr. Torres will still be here tomorrow. You need to sleep." Lyria's skin flashed through resistant colors, but she was clearly fighting a losing battle with exhaustion. She looked at Ben with concern that was achingly familiar, the worry of a child who'd found something precious and feared it might disappear. "I promise I'll be here tomorrow," Ben said gently. "We can talk more about how things work, and maybe I can show you some human toys that operate on different principles than Thetian designs." That earned him brilliant, happy colors from Lyria and an approving expression from the Empress. A attendant appeared to escort Lyria to her chambers, but not before the child insisted on hugging Ben, an apparently significant gesture given the way the Empress's skin shifted to surprised colors. "Thetian children don't typically show physical affection to non-family," the Empress explained once Lyria had departed. "That she initiated contact with you is another indicator of exceptional trust." Ben and the Empress moved to a more comfortable sitting area, and Kelly's joined them with reports that she delivered with practiced efficiency. The news coverage remained positive. Several noble houses had requested formal introductions, and security protocols for Ben's movements had been established. Through it all, the Empress listened and made decisions with the kind of systematic approach Ben associated with experienced researchers managing complex projects. "Dr. Torres," the Empress said once Kelly's had finished, "I need to be direct about something. The position I've asked you to accept comes with genuine dangers. Those who attempted to harm my daughter 6 months ago are still at large. We've identified some conspirators, but the full network remains hidden. If they perceive you as having real influence over Lyria, and by extension over imperial policy, you become a target. I understand, Your Majesty." "I'm not certain you do." The Empress's skin shifted to serious colors. "These aren't political rivals content with social maneuvering. These are beings willing to harm a child to achieve their goals. They will not hesitate to threaten or eliminate you if they view you as obstacle or opportunity." Ben thought about Lyria's trust, her joy at having someone who engaged with her genuine interests, the way her fear had evaporated when she decided he was safe. "Your Majesty, I've spent 12 years studying non-human species in field conditions that ranged from uncomfortable to actively dangerous. I've been chased by predators, caught in environmental disasters, and once accidentally poisoned by something I thought was edible. I'm familiar with risk." This is different than field research. Yes, it's more important. Ben met her eyes directly. That child trusts me. She's been traumatized and isolated, and somehow I managed to get through her defenses by being genuine. Abandoning that because there's political danger would be, he searched for the right word, wrong. Scientifically, ethically, and just fundamentally as a person who had the good fortune to help someone who needed it. The Empress studied him for a long moment, her skin shifting through contemplative colors. Advisor Kelly's suggested earlier that you possess something no courtier can fake. I'm beginning to understand what she meant. I'm just a researcher who's good at pattern recognition and happens to think kids deserve people who won't abandon them. That quality is rarer than you imagine, Dr. Torres, particularly in imperial courts where every interaction is calculated for advantage. The Empress stood, signaling that the evening was concluding. You'll be provided with comprehensive briefings on court protocols, political factions, and the security situation. Your movements will be coordinated with protection details, and you'll have direct communication access to myself and Advisor Kelly's for questions or concerns. Ben stood as well, aware that he was being dismissed, but also being brought into something significant. Your Majesty, may I ask, why are you trusting me with this? You have court full of experienced advisors, guards, and diplomats. Why give a human researcher access to your daughter? The Empress's skin shifted through colors Ben's translator identified as complex mix of hope, concern, and parental determination. Because in 6 months, no one else earned her trust, you did so in 20 minutes without trying. Either you're exceptionally skilled at manipulation, which our security assessments suggest you're not, or you're genuinely what you appear to be. Someone who helps because it's right, who responds to distress with assistance rather than calculation. I'm betting on the latter, Dr. Torres, for Lyria's sake and possibly for reasons that extend to our people's future relations. She paused at the doorway, looking back. Sleep well. Tomorrow will be challenging. You'll need to navigate formal introductions, security briefings, and likely several attempts by various factions to either recruit or test you. But you'll also have time with Lyria, which will make the political circus worthwhile. Ben returned to his quarters with his mind spinning through everything that had happened. He composed a detailed message to Ambassador Chen, outlining the security situation and the Empress's expectations. Her response came quickly. Torres, you've accidentally positioned yourself at the center of Theshan imperial politics, earned the trust of traumatized royalty, and possibly created foundation for unprecedented human-Theshan alliance. The diplomatic corps is both thrilled and terrified. Earth government is requesting regular updates, and I'm trying to figure out how to explain this in reports. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and Torres, you did good today, really good. That child needed someone genuine, and you were there. Chen. Ben stood at the window, looking out over the crystalline city that he'd been lost in just this morning. Somewhere in the palace, a small princess was hopefully sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, trusting that the strange human would still be there tomorrow. Somewhere in the empire, political factions were calculating how to exploit or eliminate his presence. And somewhere on Earth, his colleagues were probably laughing at the idea that Ben Torres, reliable, methodical, gets lost in cities Ben Torres, had somehow become a figure in imperial politics. His datapad showed the time, approximately 16 hours since he'd left the diplomatic delegation to photograph architecture. 16 hours from lost researcher to imperial companion, from anonymous scientist to political figure, from human who helped a distressed child to someone whose presence might influence the future of two civilizations' relations. He thought about Lyria's trust, her joy, the way her fear had transformed into confidence when she decided he was safe. Thought about the Empress's careful assessment and her decision to bet on his genuineness. Thought about the enemies he'd apparently acquired and the political complications that Ambassador Chen would now need to navigate. And then Ben Torres, xenobiologist who'd always preferred fieldwork to politics, made a decision that would define everything that followed. He'd be exactly what he appeared to be: genuine, honest, focused on helping a child heal rather than playing political games. Let the court manipulate and calculate, he'd just be someone Lyria could trust. If that accidentally created alliance between civilizations, or disrupted assassination conspiracies, or reshaped diplomatic relations, well, those would be interesting side effects of simply doing what seemed right. His mother's voice echoed again. Benjamin, your need to help every stray you find is going to get you into trouble someday. Looking out over an alien city from palace quarters, having accepted a position as companion to imperial royalty, with enemies he'd never met and political complications he barely understood, Ben finally understood what she'd meant. And he wouldn't have changed a single choice that brought him here. Tomorrow would bring formal court politics, security briefings, and probably several new forms of trouble. But it would also bring time with a small princess who decided he was worth trusting, who laughed when her toy bird chirped, who'd grabbed his hand with absolute confidence that he'd keep her safe. That made everything else worth navigating. Ben Torres, accidental courtier and the most improbable political figure in recent Thessian history, settled in to sleep in a palace on an alien world, ready to face whatever complications tomorrow would bring. All because he'd stopped to help a distressed child who happened to be a princess.